I was doing a quick comparison in these games on how the structure affects. Like these games they are great games to play because if we are comparing to a $7 regular turbo, that sounds so wrong. But if we are comparing to a $7 regular turbo, we can see that the rake is 10 cents higher than in these knockout games. And this is because PokerStars does not rake the bounty at all. And I think the bounty gives a bit more advantage to a skilled player. So there is something to take into consideration, that you are raked less if you are a skilled player and know how the knockouts affect your equity in different situations. Then you will also, I think you will also be able to achieve higher ROIs in these games. And if you are a skilled player, I think SharkScope will always look at your winnings a bit funnily after you have played knockouts. So SharkScope and other tournament tracking databases do not work that well on knockouts, I think. But so these knockouts, the idea in these games are that about 1/5 of a prize pool is set aside it's actually exactly 1/5 of the prize pool is set aside, and that's paid out all the time you are knocking one player out. So if I'm knocking, for example, Gaife out, then I would get $1.31 instantly to my account. And the normal price structure is also valid, so I may finish, for example, with 2 knockouts and I have gotten some money out of the game, but still it might be that I'm losing in the game if I don't finish in the top 3. And with these knockouts, I think that the first place finisher will be rewarded a bit more than usual. So in ICM, you should be taking more chances in a knockout game than in a normal game. And that's because the guy that's the first, he will get the bounty that he eliminates last, and he will get his own bounty as well. King Queen, I don't like to c-bet on that situation in general against an unknown player out of position. I don't think that there is that much that the opponent folds, and our King Queen off is playing quite well when we are seeing more cards, and if he hits something like he has a weaker king or a weaker queen and he hits the king or queen, we are getting way more in these situations. And yeah, it was only that I did have the mute on, so that's kind of a rookie mistake. But these things happen from time to time. So I think that if you are playing 9-max sit and goes, you should at least consider adding these knockouts as well to your regimen. Because I think that if you are playing without adjusting to the knockouts at all, if you're a winning player on regular games, you should be a winning player on knockouts. And if you adjust to the knockouts, then you are going to be even more winning players, so in these games, because I think that there will be a bit more ROI to be had in these knockouts. And it will be an interesting situation because we are having Jarpeko, who is our coach that's going for Supernova Elite in this table. Then we are having a strong reg, Shurfy, and then we are having Colin Moshman and he has been doing quite a lot of different stuff on poker fronts, including writing probably the best book for sit and goes. So, and Neo, yeah, you have been writing quite a lot, so perhaps. And here, even though I'm out of position and this opponent, he 3-bets such a small amount that I just couldn't fold as pretty hand as this. I'm carrying on betting here in the flush board, and I could have actually bet a little less, and when the 4 to a flush comes and there are 2 players still in, then it's an easy give up for me. And here I'm trying to get some small value out of an ace higher. And Neo asked, do you think that players are a bit more fishy in the knockouts compared to the normal turbos? So these are turbos as well. You can see that these are turbo knockouts. So the structure is like the blinds, everything is exactly the same as in turbos. And I don't know in general. I actually should look at the running games, or I'm looking at the running games on $9 and $50 or $30 and $15 level. I think in general I can see way more regs that I know in the regular structures than in knockouts, so I believe that knockouts are a bit softer, but there is way less knockouts running as well, so... And it doesn't matter up to, let's say, up to 30s, it matters because there is only one $30 game running, and it's the game that we are in right now. And there is like 15 of the games running that are not knockouts. So I think some regs are afraid of these knockouts in general, so I think in these games you can also find a bit softer games, because at least I can see that there are more regs that I know of that are playing the regular turbos than the knockouts. And Marcus, why, yeah, the pretty interesting table on the top left. And actually this wouldn't be even that bad, but all the solid players are in position against me, so there is not a lot that I can do on that table. And I'm trying to give some knockout specific ideas as well. And my HUD is almost invisible there. Now it should be there. Just a bit wider, and then it fits really nicely. So that even in this game, in the top left, because these guys are in position compared to me, like if the solid regs would be here and here would be 2 randoms and 2 randoms, I think that would be quite the optimal situation for me. I think in general people will fold too much, so I'm opening pretty widely. Widely on small blind to big blind situations. And when I get raised here, even though it's a small amount, my equity is so small in there, so I can fold pretty easily. On average, I believe I make money on those situations against average players. It actually would have been interesting if I would have remembered to switch databases before this session, because right now I don't have hands on the guys. I know that I have played against Moshman for over 1,000 hands for sure, and even against Jarppeko I have played something like 200 or 300 hands. And against Sherfy I think it might be close to 5k hands, so I'm in quite a disadvantage because I now don't have any of my hands that I should have. But so in these games, these are running quite well up to the $15 level. With queen 4 off, I hope that my opponent will limp fold that most of the time. The queen 4 off is something that I don't gain that much by getting the hand to the flop, so this is essentially it's a bluff. And it carried on as a bluff and we got the pot. And so if I'm looking at these games, you can get like 10 games running at the $15 level. So it's the last level that these games run well. And as I said, that there is like the one $30 turbo that runs right now, so... And it's a shame, because I think that these games are more profitable for a knowing player than... And in these games we can see some interesting things happening. Like in these games we can see that your stack size matters slightly more. Because if you are ahead of your opponent that you are in a heads-up pot, you can always win a knockout bounty. But if you are with the smaller stack, you should be slightly more tighter because you can't win a knockout in the hand. And I think that my opponent will almost every time have a showdown value hand there. I know that Surfy is playing a ton of tables. And I think I remember that he's giving up a bit too much. So then I'm raising pretty widely on the button, even though I know that the regs are pretty solid. And this is practically the opposite. And even the 6-9 or 8-6 suited is, I'm tempted to raise it. But in this 3-7 suited, I'm not even tempted to raise it because I think when I have marked a player as a player that I like to play against, like this purple player, I think that they will flat too much for it to become pretty unprofitable for me. But so in these tables, we know that we are doing quite well in the tables because we are having the larger stack than most of the guys on the table. So we can have more knockouts than the players that can knock out us. In here, when the opponent checks behind, I think that he seems slightly needy, and if a needy player limps, then checks behind, I think that I'm going to get the pot no matter my hand strength there by bluffing pretty much always. So I think that's a good spot to bluff. Because this guy is so needy, I don't think that ace-6 off is going to be a playable hand. Ace-6 suited would have been a nice playable hand there. And I would probably have calls with something like ace-6 suited because there is so much more that we can hit and what we can also hit and then play aggressively after we have hit it. And on the bottom right, Gross Ufa shoved, and I don't think that we can get away from this spot with eights. If someone like Francois or Spiral Node would have shoved, then it would be a different situation, but not against one player. Slightly unlucky that we are now against kings, but these things happen. If you wanna see, I think we are having enough. I think we are having enough time to do 2 sessions. So if you like the second session, for example, to concentrate only on the micros, please make a note to me on the chat or something. Normally I'm just picking the games on levels that I might have I might know some of the opponents, so that there might be some more interesting situations coming up. But we can also look how the micros are different from these games. And here we got a limp caller. Actually, limp caller hits the queen pretty well. But now that there's two queens and a complete random opponent, I think that we are actually, with ace high, we are almost always still getting the pot, so now I don't like it as much anymore. So that's something that we could have checked behind on the turn as well. In here, against, we are having an opportunity to knock one player out, and in here we would have a knockout opportunity, but Jack deuce off is just a hand that's not strong enough. And in here we flop the nut flush, and our opponent wants to bet on us, and because there is like an opportunity for the opponent to have something like a king of diamonds, that he wants to get it in on the turn but not in the river if there is going to be no third diamond. I like to shove it in there, but the board pairs or double pairs, and the opponent had 23% on the turn, so and now that we are having the shortest stack there, we'll need to play a bit more aggressively. And it sucks in these knockout games that if you are getting a really short stack, you are getting called really often because guys are going for the knockout bounties. And I think on average guys are a bit too aggressive in going for the knockout bounties, so that is something that in these games, as you see here, the 8 deuce off call, that's a bad call chippy wise pretty much always. Especially when there are no antes, but probably can't say much about that. So we need to be playing a bit more value-oriented hands when we are really short-stacked, because opponents will be enticed to call with hands that are pretty bad. And at the later stages that will happen as well. That players that, like the stacks might be in this $7 turbo. Like if we are something like four-handed and the next page jump is $9. People are doing really stupid things for getting the... And in here actually I think limping would have been better, because I think that now it's more evident that we are having a... It's more evident that you can knock me out cheaply. And that's not good for me, because I think that we are getting more callers that way. But right now we didn't get many callers, and with our ace-8 is quite good. Except when we got to the river. And let's get another interesting table here. I opened 6 tables that we can carry on this first session to the end, and it should be an interesting situation. Super You or Me has been racing into me, and I think he's probably one of the better players playing these games. So, and with aces we are blocking pretty much anything valuable, but the flush draw also misses, so we could have gotten value from a solid ace there, but there are so little aces when you are holding 2 and there's 1 on the table, so it's a really hard spot to get value when you are hitting your set with aces. And Kurpa is asking, where is Korpisoturi and Meukov? Meukov is still here, but Korpisoturi is in Riihimäki because Riihimäki is the city of winners. And in here, it's actually an interesting situation. We are getting odds to call. Usually when it's less than half the pot that you need to call and you are covering the opponent, it's going to be an easy call with pretty much anything. Because the pot odds you are getting are going to be so good. And Neo, that if the players you marked as good shove on small blind or BB for over 10 big blinds into, for example, 14 big blinds, what do you think? It depends on the player. I think that there are some players that are, and in this situation, the guy has been, for the first 20 hands, the guy has been really needy and limping a lot, and now he bets big, so I think it's going to be almost always a really big hand. In here, against a player that looks solid, I don't think that with ace-4 off we are going to have enough equity to go for it. But in general, I think that the good players, when they are shoving like 14 big blinds into me from SP to BB, I'm thinking that they are having way too many hands that are playing well pre-flop but can't stand a 3-bet. And this is actually a really interesting situation. This opponent is limping so much. Actually, that's something that we probably could have shoved profitably, but it becomes a really, really nasty situation. And we could have stop and go, but with two players and this player with a random hand, the stop and go gets worse. But when the board is paired and there is practically no draws, I think we are going to get a lot of folds with this limp and go. But I don't like the limp and go because now this guy can realize his equity for free with pretty much anything. So I think that the opponents, when they are shoving something like 14 BBs, they are having way too many small pocket pairs, something like small aces. And then I'm calling the bigger pocket pairs, and then I'm calling a lot of good aces as well. And might be that, depends on the player. There are some players that are shoving with the... And we have pot controlled this hand against the Pristina, and I don't see any reason not to call when the only bet is on the river. Oh wow. He or she got not the maximum value out of his or her hand for sure. I would have called even more, probably 2 streets with the 9 there, especially when the board is so tame, but now the opponent pretty much had the nuts there. Let's isolate this limper because he's playing on a mobile phone and he has been playing pretty much every hand, so I think this is a situation that we can gain an advantage to play against a really bad player. I didn't bet the flop because even though I think that the opponent might... Because I think that the opponent probably isn't folding that much. And that's a board that we are usually winning the pot with an ace high, and the guy seems to be pretty tame. And now this is actually a pretty nice situation because against Sherfy I'm now shoving an ace-3 suited with approximately... If there are players that are I know that they are shoving only something like pocket pairs, and there are some players that if they are shoving more than 12 big blinds, they are shoving always pocket pairs. Then it's easy for me to be calling with everything that's higher than, or a lot of suited hands that are suited and connected, and also the bigger pocket pairs as well. And in here there are two players all in. King Jack off is going to play okay in a three-way pot, and we are getting great pot odds here. We are requiring something like 25% equity to call, and we are getting some additional equity from the probability of getting a bounty, and I think we got the bounty there because this guy was slightly with a slightly higher stack, something like 5 chips higher stacked in this Adelaide. So really interesting situation. And this is on the edge. I would be enticed to shove that against the opponent that has limped a lot. But I think the 9 king off might be slightly too bad as a shove there, that we are going to get called with better too often. And a6 suited because there's only Sherfy after us that's with a higher stack size. I think this is a plus EV shove, even though it might be slightly controversial. And Neo, yeah, the low pockets, if you are shoving them for over 10 big blinds, then you are I think you are playing them well, because they are so hard hands to play post flop with. And here we got an opportunity for a knockout, and then we got a shove from Super You or me. That's pretty aggressive guy. We are requiring something like 45%. I'm wondering if he's having enough ace-x combos in his range. I think that something like 5s is probably the worst pocket pair that he shoves, and now we are quite lucky that we dominated both of them, and also that we hit our set on the river when this truly was almost having the pot. And it will make your opponents harder to take advantage from your ranges, but if you are only shoving low pocket pairs, then it's easy for the opponent to take advantage of your ranges by calling the connected and suited cards that are higher than the pocket pair you are likely to shove. But if you are shoving something like low aces that are equally hard hand to play post flop, low aces and small pocket pairs, then you are creating a range that the opponent it's harder for the opponent to exploit that range. So that's something to take into account. And I think that it's better if we are playing these hands to the end, then holding a small break, and after that carrying on with another set, but then in the micros, to see how the game changes in the micros. I think this guy is also a noob guy. I think that I have seen him before, or the name is ringing a bell, so I think he might be a better player. And also this Hangy, when he's playing $15 and $30 games, I think it's more likely that he's a reg as well. And Beetle, CZ. The more tables they are playing, and if they're playing $15 and $30 games, I think it's slightly more likely that they are regs. Then jack off. And now we are not having Calais on the table anymore, so the table got better for us. And even this other $30 table, that when we are in position against Moshman, I think it's better for us than the other way around. Damn it! I'd like to shove this as well. This is probably on the edge of profitability when there are no antes involved. Probably something like 10 BBs would be a Nash shove here. And when we get called by Ace King off, it's going to be the not worst situation to... Or not the not worst, it could be a pair of aces as well. But when the big blind, even though he's having a large stack, but he seems that he's likely going to be tight, so he's going to be a random player, I think that will be a profitable shove even if it's not a Nash shove. And hello PLO X-Choker. At first, when you at night asked me about the opportunity to get emails when we are streaming online, at first I thought it's not possible, but then I don't know, I probably lost count at 2 or 3 different ways to get advanced notification when we are streaming. So if you are following this and you wanna see us live doing the stream, please join our forums. Then you can also take part in the chat. And also you can subscribe to our Twitch channel. That will give you an email instantly as a coaching session starts. And you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and from there you are getting advanced notification from about 2 to 3 hours before a coaching session. So, and there will be some interesting stuff in the social media as well. So that will be good. And if you wanna stay focused on what we have on video, please subscribe to us on YouTube and like our videos. The more we get subscribed and liked, the more videos we can produce in the future, and the more videos we will produce in English in the future. So if you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, please do, and please like this video or other videos that you have watched. It matters a lot to us. And also take part in the forum discussions. There should be pretty good discussions on how to become a winning player on the forums already. And we need more activity to the forums. And now I can see in here that normally I don't mark regs until I have played something like at least 300 to 500 hands with them, so that I can know that if they are playing good or not. And usually if I see them doing something stupid, then it might take even longer for them to be regs. But if I see players that are playing something like these guys have playing, that they are limping a lot and not playing aggressively, then it's easier for me to mark them as players that I want to play against, even though I haven't played more than 25 to 30 hands with those. Because if I can see that an opponent is like 63/21 on VPIP and PFR, then I can pretty easily deduct that if I think the optimal frequencies in these games would be around 15/13 or something like that. I know that the opponents are so far away from the optimal levels that I don't need to have many hands, and it will be increasingly unlikely for a winning player to have that kind of statistics. And this is actually also something that's really interesting. When I min-raised my small blind there, I noticed that this Ficus 888 had used an advanced action button, so he instantly folded when I pressed the raise. And this means that I can abuse that by min raising a lot. And that's because the opponent doesn't take my raise size into account when he's using the advanced action buttons. When he's using the advanced action buttons, I can then pretty much deal with the smallest sizing that I can use than the min raise. And I can steal even wider than from an opponent that even thinks about. So I don't recommend using the advanced action buttons ever. They are bad and evil. In here, $690 to pay and about 25% required in a three-way pot. Something like 28% probably after. We are getting it with 10-9 suited. And now we are at one of the worst situations that our flush draw is dominated and there's one other player with. And with jacks, we are never folding. When we open, we are practically never folding. If there would be an all-in from 4 guys behind me, then I would have folded, but that's pretty much the only situation. And talk a bit about the makeup of your raise call, raise fold, and shove ranges for good and bad opponents from late positions. Whoa! That's kind of a big area to cover. Usually I'm trying to construct a mental model on how my opponents are leaking their equity and then position my ranges in a way that would take as much of that equity the opponents are leaking to me, because I like equity. In tournament poker, it's not about winning chips. It's not about finishing in the money. Tournament poker is a game that you are playing to increase your equity in every single situation. So in every situation that we are playing to increase our equity. And we are trying to take the maximum equity option at every situation. And as Deja said, that the next Supernova free roll is in 3 weeks. So that's something that we are going to play. I think the last Supernova free roll I finished out of the money, but this year I have finished somewhere around 12th position and I think 21st, so I have been deep in those games. In here, if the opponent is a thinking player, I think that we are getting slightly more calls with a shove than with a call, because call looks like really nutsy. That we are going to only have nuts if we are calling a shove of that size. In here, if we are thinking that both guys are regs, this is an any 2 shove spot. And Colin Moshman is not calling wide. That's something that he's practically never erring on the side. And now, even though actually, I think that the value of getting the knockout would be slightly higher, and these opponents, they can't call me, because if they call and this Ludababe folds, they are going to do an equity disaster if they're calling with a weaker hand than, let's say, queens. Even if they know that I'm shoving any 2 cards there, they can't be calling me with a worse hand than something like queens or jacks. And today I'm not going to play the Sunday Million. We are going to concentrate on sit and goes today. In here we are having next to 0 equity hand, so that's a really nice spot for us to bluff. Especially as we are the first openers, so that we should have aces in our range and aces and kings. Now that we are getting more equity with 6, I think that betting doesn't make that much sense. But also check calling doesn't make that much sense, because when our opponent calls our flop bet, then I think when our opponent is bad and he calls our flop bet, then it's going to be pretty likely that he's either having an ace or a king. And so then we are drawing to 5 outs and we are not getting enough. This is a situation that I think that with something like queen ten suited, this would be a snap call, because I think that his range will consist so much of small pocket pairs. I highly recommend for you to watching the, I don't know, it was the second last or third last episode of Big Bang Theory, when they were discussing about time travel and the different modes that you can speak in English. And that's something that, grammar is something that I'm not good at. But luckily I'm quite good at poker, so that's what we are trying to concentrate. But let's carry on with that shouldn't be calling. Calling rather than can't be calling. Because of course, they always can be calling, even when they shouldn't. Something like king 3 off heads up against an opponent that's likely solid. It's an easy option, and a king 3 off will play pretty badly post flop. So it's going to be an advantage for us to just get the pot pre-flop, and with those stack sizes, it's going to be a good shove. And as Neo said that you once hit the advance action button, call anything, after losing a big pot and being crippled 3-handed, and then two big stacks got all in before me and I couldn't unhit the button fast enough, but I was lucky and survived that all in and got second. Yeah, but that's a situation that it's not about the strength of your hand or the stack size. There might still be an optimal play, but if you don't even wanna watch what strategic option your opponents are taking in that situation, then you are more likely to do a pretty bad option there. King 10 suited would be something that I would have shoved. I think king 10 off is too weak. But so Neo, I think it's depend for the really big question on the markup of my shove and raise call and raise fold ranges. So, for example, if there is an opponent that folds way too much, then I'm shoving, or from SB, then I'm shoving very few hands, because if my opponent is folding way too much against small raises, then I'm going to have just a really wide raise fold bluff range and a really tiny raise call range, but then it doesn't make that much sense to have that wide of a shove range. So I'm taking advantage of my opponent leaking equity, and that's the main part. And those ranges will look quite different depending on the opponents. And now Ludababe, he limped and then checked the flop and bet the turn. I still don't think that our pair of fours is going to be strong enough. We are hoping to get some showdowns with the 4-9 off. Because usually the passive players are giving us some cheap showdowns, but we couldn't get one in that position. And let's carry on discussing the different ranges, and then it might be that there is an opponent that really rarely folds his big blind and plays really good and creative blind defense. Then I'm increasing my shove range from small blind, because then I need to play out of position against a player that plays well against me in position, so I'm taking the positional advantage away from him by increasing my shove range, and then I'm also shrinking my min raise fold and min raise call ranges, because the min raise fold ranges are likely to find some really nasty situations against the guy post flop. So, but usually even on those guys, it will be more profitable to have a small min raise fold and a small min raise call range, even though they are making your life hell when you are min raising, especially with the worse hands. But that's, in a way, that's an interesting discussion point, because that's one of the key situations to play in tournament poker on the short stacks play. And let's say an example that will make some sense would be that when I said last time that if there is an opponent that folds way too much, if I see that from 7 to 9 handed an opponent would fold, for example, more than 80% of his big blinds to steal, that would be a spot where I'm increasing my min raise fold ranges a lot, because the opponent will be folding a lot of his equity away. And I think most of the regs are folding their equity away pretty often, and on the other direction, there are villains. I'm telling them villains because they're making my life harder and I can't exploit them as easily as the tamer regs. But there are regs that might be like folding their big blinds to steal something like 60% of the time, and against small blind steal they are folding something like 30 to 40% of the time when they are having enough stack size behind. So against those opponents, it's going to be more shove oriented from small blind, and even against those guys it might still be really min raise oriented on the button, or because then we are having the position and we can make the other guys life hell. So but that's something that it's a really wide discussion point, and but I'm trying to give you something that you can start thinking about, and then start to analyze your own games, and you can look, for example, one of your reg stats and see that how can you abuse the situation. And something that can be really profitable, that you are going for something like, if you are 20 big blinds deep, how often you are going to, like let's say 20 to 25 big blinds deep, what's your steal success from small blind or from button or from cutoff. And then you can also look at when there are antes in game, that how much, if your steal success is something that it might be that if your opponents are folding enough, like after antes, if the opponent is folding his big blind against a small blind steal and there are like 7 or 8 players paying antes, it might be that the opponent would need to defend something like 60%, but if most opponents, or if your steal success is 70%, so then you know that if you are min-raise dealing with those stack depths, you are making money. And you can do the same for button, like how often your steal needs to work for a certain stack depth and antes and everything involved. So how often does it need to work for it to be good, and then increase your... And I'd say increase your ranges, because I think most of the players are stealing way too little. So something like small blind, button and cutoff, I think most players haven't looked at their data that they have collected on those games, and they haven't adjusted their game with the data that they have collected on these games. And in these training sessions that I'm broadcasting, usually I'm trying to get something in the sessions that's going to be easily usable for most players, and then there will be something that's probably a bit harder to grasp and understand, but something for you to think about and do work on your own as well, and thinking about how to improve. But I think in sit and goes, it's still that there might be some situations in sit and goes that regs are playing pretty well. But for example, if you have a reg that knows the shove fold Nash equilibrium in his sleep, the same reg may be exploited by not playing shove fold. If he's playing perfect shove fold, then you can min raise or limp or get him out of the game that he's really comfortable playing. Get him to play a game that he's not comfortable playing and where he's making big mistakes. And of course that means also the other way around. You should be comfortable playing the games that your opponents will make you play. That if your opponents are generally just shoving into you from 15 big blinds down, then you should be really comfortable with the good calling ranges for the 15 big blind and smaller shoves. And on the other hand, if people are limping into you or min raising into you, then you should be comfortable playing the games that your opponents will make you play. Like then, how much do you shove over limps? How much do you check behind? What kind of hands do you check behind? What kind of hands do you shove? What kind of hands do you raise small? Or let's say the same with against the min raise. What do you 3-bet shove? What do you 3-bet small? What do you call? But that's only that. I think that you'll get most advantage to your games by being good at the game that happens most often. This actually feels quite horrible. I'm thinking about... Actually, I'm shoving this, even though this is not Nash, but this opponent, I think we have shoved like... I think we have shoved 3 times on him or min raised 3 times, and he has not done anything against that, so then we are going to steal really wider than Nash. And that Meiryu guy seems like someone who folds way too much BBs on spots where he should give you a hard time. Yeah, that's correct. And I have taken, or I have exploited that I'm having, when I'm having one hand that I can play only against Meiryu, that I'm always raising it. So even though I had the smallest stack a moment ago, now I'm starting to be a medium stack because I have stolen mainly from Meiryu. So it's kind of interesting. I think in general the opponent will gain a lot by either if there is an opponent that steals 100% from small blind, and there is something like, let's say 15 big blinds and he carries on stealing, he will have a lot of crap in his range that he will fold to a 3-bet. And this is also interesting that he has folded 4 times in a row. But now it's the time to play back at me with King 6 suited. So I think that both strategy options are reasonable for Meiryu. To be 3-bet shoving really wide and calling and putting pressure on me post-flop. I think the 3-bet shoving is an easier option, but the calling and taking more hands to showdown, especially if he's a good post-flop player, would be probably more profitable. When we are small blind against big blind, so big blind will have position. If he's a weak post-flop player and, for example, always giving up, then it's going to be way better for him to 3-bet shove instead of flat calling me. Because if he's giving up way too much post-flop, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to be first min-raising and then I'm going to be c-betting pretty much 100% of my hands, so it's always, it depends. And as you can see, there is not that much post-flop hands, or there are not many post-flop hands that have come up, so. And I think it's better than always when someone wins chips. I'm always happiest when the someone that wins chips is the weakest player on the table, so. So when Ludababe won against Meiryu, I'm really happy because I'm getting those chips easier from Ludababe than from Meiryu. Even though I think that thus far I have gotten pretty easy chips from Meiryu as well. And Neo says that that bubble will never end. That's something that if you are getting to the bubble when the blinds are pretty low, then it might be that there will be a never-ending bubble. Like, this bubble has lasted for as long as a hyper game will usually last, like this 24 hands. That's going to be pretty long for a bubble. And in general, the less people are calling on the bubble, the longer the bubble will be. This is slightly a hazard when Ludababe is on the small blind, but I think Jack 8 suited will still have enough equity. And the players will generally, I think 2 of the players will be too tight, and then there is only one wild card, but the wild card is having the largest stack right now, so he will have more weight in my books. And even Ruthenia, I think that I'm going to be calling him pretty wide, but actually, now that I noticed that it's only 1 out of 2 times, because this Ludababe or Meiryu have been playing so many hands out of these hands that this Ruthenia hasn't had a chance to play. That's quite interesting. That out of 28 hands, he should have had something like 6 or 5 opportunities to steal from me from SB, but he has only had 2. And with a big stack, what do? You let the big dog eat. So when you are having the big stack, the best way to keep your big stack big and happy is to put it in the middle, use it to apply pressure to your opponents. And is the Jack-8 suited shove? That's something that we can review after these games. I think it's quite interesting hand to be honest. That I'm unsure if it's a good shove or not. I think in general people are underestimating the value of... I think in general people are underestimating the value of suited and connected cards as cards to shove. And in here, if Ruthenia doesn't shove, we are going to shove trees. Because trees are a hand that will have decent equity even against a tight range, and we are expecting our opponents to fold a lot. And maybe you had called me once with the King 6 suited, but that's not way out of line. I think that's kind of what I expected. My stats are going to look so ugly during this game, but I think that we have had really good opportunities on putting a lot of pressure on our opponents and building our big stack, so then our stats might look a bit wild, but that's something to be expected. And that's also that you shouldn't play every tournament to trying to achieve certain kind of stats. The stats are pretty much what kind of opportunities you are getting in the game. You shouldn't be forcing those opportunities. There will be games that, at least on the hypers, that are looking like Aarnimetsa just folds his stack away and then puts the money in bad, but those are games that I just haven't had any good chances. In here I didn't call Ruthenia, even though that might have been... That will be profitable chip EV wise, but I don't think and this will be a bit too profitable to fold, but the Queen 4 off or Jack 4 off, I think, even though it's chip EV profitable, with the bubble mathematics, it's not profitable against Ruthenia. And right now that when we are stacked this high on the bubble, I don't think that the bounty is going to be big enough to be a deciding factor. And Neo1186 asks, do you prefer shove over min raises at these stack sizes? It depends. I'd say that somewhere around 8 big blinds or less. It's going to be pretty much always shoves, and in sit and goes, because the opponents may find some 3-bets that are going to be horrible for us, it will be that our shove range is going to go even higher when we are applying pressure and are in a situation that opponents can easily apply pressure to us. So it's again one of those situations of it depends, and this is really exploitable. Actually, I could have shoved this. It would have been better, because even when our opponent shoves against us with something bad, this is not going to have enough equity on average on the something bad compared to when we are just shoving it. And we are trying to inch the chap stack in, so Trying to get gimme. But no. Not any more than that. And if he had something like ace 10 off or something that he would have called a shove as well, then we are looking like idiots by min raising ace queen off. I think I finally found something that I won't shove against Meiryu. I think with those stack sizes he will be quite inclined to call, so that when we are not having a lot of fold equity, then we are not going to shove the worst hands. Sometimes there will be opponents that we will shove even the worst hands, but that's only because they are folding way too much. And now when Meiryu is having a larger stack, then we are having more fold equity, and then we can shove a practically exactly as crappy hand as the last time. But this is also one of those situations that now we are having way more leverage against Meiryu than when he had a smaller stack than Ludababe. So it's going to be slightly interesting, and we are running good. We are totally getting dominated pre-flop, and then we are rivering the 5. So fishy. Yeah, give it to me. It's always nice that the player that I like to play against will call me a fish. I like it, especially when I got all of their chips. And now we are having a break of about 5 minutes. And then we are coming back to 9 max. 9 max knockouts, but then we are going back to micros. We are back. And we are back for more. It's actually quite interesting that I looked at. We are now doing the micros part, and I know a player there that's registered already on the games. So there is a $3.50 Turbo Knockout with 2 Supernova VIPs in the game right now, so it shall be quite interesting. And Chakal, I think that the problem isn't that the opponent isn't ahead of my range. The problem in that hand exactly is that even when he's ahead of my range, he needs to be ahead of my range more, because if he just waits and the next opponent busts, then it's going to be good for his equity, and he will get the second place monies more often. And Wolfshane, that's something interesting. Wolfshane from Romania. I've never seen that one before. If he asks me what a Supernova is doing in a $1.5 game, then I'll do my patent answer. Grinding for Supernova Elite. And just the hello. And you are from Åland. That's an interesting place, let's say the least. And in the micros of the micros, I'm liking to add some of the smallest pocket pairs to my limping range, because I think that we can set mine really profitably in these games. That we are really often, with our limps, we are getting it to the... And actually he asked me for So, now it's going to be. And these hands like deuces, they are great hands in a way that our equity is really easily noticeable in these games. If we are heading a set, our equity is like 80 to 90% in these situations. And if we are not hitting a set, we know that it's going to be easy to fold, especially on a multi-way pot. And Freddy has a question that you are playing 9-man sit and goes and your my C net adjusted nearly doubles my C net 1. So that's my currency net 1. Of you that don't know Poker Tracker, does it mean that you just are having bad luck, and how the my C net adjusted is calculated? So the my C net adjusted is calculated that it adjusts the amount that you have won, and it adjusts it for all of the all-in situations that are completely known, that all the players in the hand are all in and there are no unknown cards that the opponents are holding. So it adjusts for all the all-in situations according to ICM, so independent chip model. So it tries to find out what you should have won if the all-in situations in the table would have run according to the all-in equity that the different players had. So, in a sense, you have been unlucky, and the sit and goes, the my C net adjusted, it's a really weird number, because you don't need to be all in for it to adjust your equity. Especially near the bubble, when two players are all in the hand, and one of them gets knocked out or not, it will affect your equity, and you can run over EV even if you are never all in a tournament. You can then run over or under EV. So it's a measure of luck in sit and goes, and it tries to take away as much luck as possible without introducing any biases. So, and in general, I think it's really useful to have to look at the my C net adjusted, because it has approximately 3 times lower standard deviation than the results line. So, or actually the variance, so the standard deviation is less, but in general, you are only requiring about 3 times, or you are requiring 3 times less tournaments with the my C net adjusted than you would. So, for example, if you are having a 1000 tournaments with the my C net adjusted, it's worth about the same than if you would have 3000 hands with only looking at your winnings. And in here it's just 15 chips to pay, so it's really close. And I found out the special in another table, an opponent that limp 3 bets all in with jacks this time around. So, and what we can instantly see when we are at the micros, opponents' bet sizings are becoming more and more erratic. So we can see in these games that the opponents are betting for 5x or 6x pre-flop and min-raising pre-flop, and there are way more limpers in the games. And even though we are getting really great price there, but 2-8 suited, even when it's suited, it's just going to be too bad of a hand. Neo, yeah, it's the same than the red line in Hold'em Manager. I think the line is normally red in Poker Tracker, or is it orange normally? I can't even remember. I have changed the colors according to my liking a long time ago, so. And also the post-flop bet sizes. There is a small blind from Kyrgyzstan. That's actually a really interesting country to be from. And when he bets just like min bets, and we are having a lot of showdown value with our ace-king, we are going to be calling. So it shall be quite interesting to look at these games. And when the people are having a lot more, when they are limping a lot more, when they are calling a lot more pre-flop, then we are tightening our ranges in general. And we are value betting bigger. We are value betting as much as we think that we are going to get out of those. And we are slightly more likely to get it all in. I think in this situation, it's quite likely that our opponent will have either a flush draw. It will be quite likely that our opponent will have either a flush draw or a jack. And there are not a lot of bad cards, so letting it carry on to the turn, like there are only aces and queens that are really bad for us. That we are like 80% likely that we are getting it in better. Like there are hearts and aces and queens that are bad hands for us. But because they're so unlikely. But there will be, like the opponent min raises us. And in here, because the opponent is such short stacked and there is also 120 in the middle, I think that we are having enough equity, and we might even be ahead of him because there is not a lot, and we are having like one overcard. Because we are having like 12 outs, so 48% on the flop. That's around what I expected. Against the queen we would have had a lot worse equity. But luckily he didn't have a queen. So Calleon, yeah, I played the bigger ones earlier. And we played at one $30 game, but we didn't have any fun hands to discuss. It would have been pretty awesome if we would have gotten to heads up or something, because I think that there would have been some really interesting hands. I actually won the $30 game that you were in, so I think so. So it was a nice one, and it's a bit of a shame that these games, these Turbo Knockouts, aren't running any higher. And in here, we are not scared of anything anymore, but it's because even the higher aces are going to be splitting the pot when the board is paired, and there is a bit more likely that our opponent will be having something to call. Actually, now that he folds, I'm thinking that we could have even bet a lot bet a bit smaller. But we can see in these games, this is like a $3.50 game, this top left game. And there is like not a single solid player. I can say right now, there is not a single solid player in the game. So, and from the Massey, I'm thinking that we are having a hand on the other table right now. That's table away from screen, and actually that's even not that bad. Opponent just had one of the worst hands against me when he got for broke on the river. And as you have heard, that there has been not a lot of discussion about the knockout specific stuff, because the knockouts matter mostly at the early games that we are getting all in, and there has been not that much interesting, and only when we are still having only 4 cards that are nice for us, the old 10s, because the opponents are betting so small. I think it's still going to be worth it for us to draw the bottom gut shot. And right now, when there are king, jack, and a queen, there's always going to be a better pocket pair than my ace high, or better pair than my ace high is going to be for someone for sure. And I don't think that these guys are not folding a lot of pairs, so youch! Like $1,000 up and then $3,000 down. That sucks. And the EV is over break even, and well, these are things that happens, and with your buy-ins, I think those are situations that are just going to happen, and they are part of the grind. And Marcus, why it's only one part that I noticed that people are having, like, when we are going from $15 games to $30 games, in the $15 games the regs are having an idea on the bet sizes, but in these games it looks like there are no regs. So the bet sizes might be quite interesting. But I think the players in these games, because they are playing so far away from what would be optimal in the games, I think these games are going to be pretty easy to beat. Beat when you are knowing the basic sit and go strategy. I don't know, perhaps Neo can chime in on if these $3.5 Turbo Knockouts, do they look softer than the $3.5 games that you have played lately? I think in this, for something like Niedman that plays really tightly, I think that he will probably be a winning player in these games. And these Massey and Sivas, even though I don't think that it's likely they are good regs, I think that they might be winning players in these games, because the opponents are going to be so interesting. It's actually really interesting because there are now two like reggae type of guys, and when Ringo limps, then it's easy. And Neo, that's true that there's not a lot of data in these games thus far. I'd say in general, the knockouts are going to be easier. Some of the regs are avoiding the knockouts, and I don't completely understand why. They shouldn't. These games are awesome. And as I said before, these games are awesome because I think that the variance is a bit lower when you can get money from these, and the money gets distributed a bit more evenly with the bounties. And also I think that when these games are raked less, they are softer, and there are more places that you can get an edge from your opponent. I think that these are games that they are really good to like. And Kaleon asks that how deep effective would you shove the ace 8 suited upper left? Do you think, or and now it's also a question of effective to whom? Effective against Ringo, that's the most likely player to be the caller, or effective against the other players here? Because I think that's a key distinction as well. Oh, I have 4 tables, so it just seemed like this table popped up. Bottom right, ace-5 off from cutoff for 10 BBs. Isn't that a bit too loose? I would shove down to ace-9 off there from my orientation points. It might be, especially as there are no antes in the game. I'll mark the hand. That's a good way to find it out. Actually, probably, because there are 2 players that are probably going to be a bit wider than they should, so I think that that's going to be spot on. That ace-5 off is going to be a worse hand. And even though Mase called us with king-queen off in the ace-5 hand, we are still going for an exploitive shove. Shove in here, and unfortunately he had a king-10 off. Still not enough to say that there's still not enough to adjust. And when there are no antes, I might be playing a bit too loose, and that's actually some point that I could also min raise pretty widely, but because I think these guys are going to be folding too much. But for the ace-8 suited hand, the upper left, let's see if I can get the hand back. So that in here, the keys are, like in here when opponents are just 15 big blinds deep, and if Ringo would be 15 big blinds deep, this would be a bit nastier to shove. But as long as he's 12 big blinds or less, I think we can shove ace-8 suited profitably. And something like if they all would be 15 big blind stacks, then it would be nastier. For something like 3s, when we are having 2 limpers, it's going to be profitable. So this is something that I think effective stack size, it only compares Ringo's and my. So in here we would be 8 big blinds effectively, according to, for example, Hold'em Resources calculator. But truthfully, I think we are a bit deeper there. I did lose sight on also. What did we lose on? Oh, there was one player that limp called with ace-jack suited. Well, that was not a bad situation for us. But for something like this ace-8 suited, it's not a really good hand, and so it's not going to be something that we are... It doesn't need to be much higher or much deeper stacks on anyone in this table for us to be not shoving ace-8 suited. So it's an interesting question on Calleon, and for something like if everybody in here would be the 15 big blinds deep, I probably wouldn't have shoved this. And something like Ringo would be 1200 chips, I think then I wouldn't be shoving this. And even if all the guys behind me are 1500 and Ringo is 800, then I'm still going to fold. But if there is like only one player, like this button is 18 big blinds deep, I think this is still a shove with ace-8 suited. So this is a bit on what we are discussing about when we are talking about effective stack size in here. And I don't think that many people even know that when they are looking at their tool, like Poker Tracker 4 or Hold'em Manager, I don't think most people even know that how the effective stacks are calculated in the software for every hand that you are thinking about. And that's also something that if you are using your tool, if you are using your HUD, please take some time and know exactly what each of the numbers in your HUD mean. That's something that's really important. Because if you do not know what the different numbers in your HUD mean, then the HUD is pretty close to worthless for you. And there might be something that will make it that I can, for example, say that I have been playing really stupidly because of my HUD or because I didn't know exactly what was in my HUD. I had this fold to 3-bet on my HUD, and in Poker Tracker 4 and Hold'em Manager, the difference is that fold to 3-bet doesn't mean in Poker Tracker that you would need to be raised at the beginning. For example, in here, if I would min raise, the crash and burr would 3-bet. Then for the fold to 3-bets that would be calculated for Niedman, Feliao, Chukka, and for me. And the stat that I wanted to have there and thought that I had there was fold to 3-bet after a raise. But that was a key difference because the fold to 3-bet stats were like 80 to 90% on pretty much everyone except the loosest players. So I thought that I can now 3-bet shove like pretty much anything because the opponents are folding so much. But in reality the opponents weren't folding so much, and I burnt a ton of equity before I noticed that I had a number on my HUD that wasn't connected to reality. In here with trees, if it's a limp pot, we are going to shove. And thus far it looks like we have ran better at the medium stakes sit and goes than in these micros. What does aggression frequency mean in your HUD? That's a great question. Aggression frequency means post-flop. When there is a post-flop situation, it is the amount of aggressive actions compared to passive actions. And that's for every street, from flop, turn and raise. And in here, it's going to be a really nice spot to shove ace king off. We are not getting eliminated here. Of course, if Gibbsy doesn't call that limped first. But the pot is going to be huge, and I think it's going to be a heads-up pot, and we are going to get quite the big pot. If everybody gives up, we are really happy. If someone calls, we are likely happy. We are really happy. But so the aggression frequency, it's the frequency of aggressive actions post-flop compared to passive actions that's basically calling. For example, check raising is an aggressive action, betting is an aggressive action, just raising is an aggressive action, and calling is the passive action. So for example, if the aggression frequency is 80%, I know that I'm probably getting more value out of my opponent by letting him bet if I'm having a really great hand than if I would bet myself, because the opponent is going to be calling so little of the bets compared to the times that he will be betting himself. And that's something that you can't use if you are using Hold'em Manager 2. You pretty much can't use aggression frequency. You need to use aggression factor. That, in my opinion, is a stat that's harder to read. And it's an inferior stat because it requires more thinking. But it's only because the aggression frequency in Hold'em Manager doesn't take into account that with the aggression frequency in Hold'em Manager, if you shove pre-flop and the opponent calls, it will record like passive action, passive action, passive action for all of the streets. And that means like in Hold'em Manager 2 or Hold'em Manager 1, the aggression frequency will always be too low, but you can't adjust to it because it depends on how short stacked were you in the table. Aggression factor, it's mainly that it's harder to read, in my opinion. That's my main gripe about it. I think the aggression factor works in Hold'em Manager 2, so that's a good point, but and Neo1186, when we are so short stacked, I think pretty much the optimal way to play ace king there would be to 3-bet shove. I think that we are going to get called by worse. Or if we are really lucky, we are called by 2 worse hands. That's like the guys they are waiting to give their money to me. And I love those games where my opponents are waiting to give their money to me. And now it's going to be quite interesting because now we are playing against an opponent that... Now we are playing against an opponent and we are having quite the deep stacked heads up. And in general, my general heads up strategy will be all about we'll be all about looking to attack him as much as we can. And now I think that even though we don't have the heart, I think it's quite unlikely that he's having it as well. And when he snap calls, I think he's having a small heart in his hand. And I think that we are not getting him away from a small heart, so we just need to check and give it away on the river. But I think on the turn in general, I think that if my opponent is not having a heart there, we are going to get the pot so often that it's going to be quite profitable to bluff him. Against a thinking opponent, c-bet doesn't make that much sense, but I think against these kind of opponents that are just looking at their own cards, it's going to be really hard for them to hit that flop, and if they are giving me the pot on the flop most of the time, it's going to be really good for... This is also going to be an interesting hand. Because I'm thinking even to shove this, because I think that our opponent will play so badly against a shove, and it could have been a pretty good shove. We are going to get it in pretty much no matter what, because there is going to be worse hands also in our opponent's range. And now there was like a min-raise call from aces, and that was... Actually, that's also something that if we are... And actually, if we are thinking that if we are having a lot of edge against our opponent, it's probably good to just keep the pot small there. That's actually pretty interesting hand all in all, because it doesn't have that much post-flop playability. We like if we win the pot then and there. And the stack depth it's slightly out of depth. It's a icky spot, let's say the least. Christmas comes, our opponent probably has a showdown value, and then we hit the straight. And yeah, Calleon, when the 4-bet is scary looking, we can't fold. With nines, we pretty much, I don't think that we can call that often. Because then the visibility of our hand will be really, really bad. And first hand he raises, but it's only for something like 6 hands. And now we are bluffing the river. There are no draws that are hitting, and I think that our opponent just gives it up. In that situation, we are having quite nice equity with the Jack-10 suited still. I think we could have bluffed it on the flop as well, but when we are having then we are having gutshot and we are having 2 big cards, so it's not that often that our opponent would be folding that much better hands. Especially if I think that in general these kind of opponents that are calling a lot. I think that these kind of opponents that are calling a lot, they will also be... If they are having a gutshot, they are pretty likely they are going to be calling. And Neo is secretly rooting for Gibbsy. Maybe he can restore some honor for us micro players. I think that the opponent have been playing like pretty honestly. And when he's playing pretty honestly, I don't think that if I'm getting... Actually, that's something that's... I think I could have gotten him away from the ace high, so... And if I see that my opponent folds next to never, with something like this, if my opponent folds next to never, then we don't need to inflate the pot pre-flop. And if our opponent min raises us from the big blind there, I think that it's going to be an easy defense still. But then we can, if our opponent doesn't fold to our min raises, then we can just deny him the opportunity to. This is actually a hand that will play pretty nicely. And now that we hit the money, let's say it this way, and now we are just trying to get the money in. And I think that our opponent will call us with an ace or a king. And that's like the perfect situation for us, that our opponent calls us with a weaker ace. Dominated ace or dominated queen. I think that if Neo was secretly rooting a bit for Gibbsy, I think now Neo needs to be praying for Gibbsy. Ouch. Gibbsy is making a comeback. With these stack sizes, I don't think this is a profitable shove. I don't think this is a profitable min raise against a guy that doesn't like to fold that much. Could be a profitable limp if he folds too much post flop. But I'd like to have a better hand to go there to see if. And he limps. That's something that's going to be slightly interesting. With something like queen 8 off, we are having plenty of equity pre-flop. And it's not going to be a hand that's easy to play post-flop. And now that I was cocky and said that now that Gibson is a miracle and you need to be praying for him, and then he's suddenly doing a comeback. So I think this is going to be a good reminder for you that don't be cocky. He calls the flop. There are so many draws that he can have that we can still bluff the river profitably. I think that he will fold ace highs there, and he doesn't need to fold much. The 10-3 suited it's at least slightly interesting call, let's say the least so. And now it's over, and we can celebrate for winning of $1.5 sit and go. So that's going to be something pretty interesting. We won $30 sit and go, a $15 sit and go, $1.5 sit and go, and we got through the skills you need to win each single one of those. But then we should go through some of the marked hands. We have some hands that should be interesting. And as you can see that my new database is called SpinGo, and you can just guess why it is so. And let's start with the first hands. I think that's going to be the best option. So this was a tournament where actually I'm trying to, if I'm making it bigger, do we get the stack sizes visible? Yeah, we do. So that's good. So here we can see that there was a guy that, or there were two guys that were, I think were two guys that were probably too tight, and then there was a one loose cannon. And then the question is that is it profitable for me to shove Jack 8 suited? And we could have some opinions in here. What would be the most profitable way to play Jack 8 suited? Would it be to min-raise, shove or fold? So I'm going for view hand details, then I'm going for copy, pasting from clipboard to Hold'em resources calculator, and I'm waiting for if there are some ideas, if this is a good shove or a bad shove. And Deia said that call is no option. Of course you can limp here as well. But if you want to limp here, then you should have some description why you should limp here. And Callion says that this is probably a shove unless the big stack has done something really absurd earlier. And Marcus Y is saying limp fold. I wanna hear some descriptions why you would limp fold in here, but now that we used Hold'em resources calculator to calculate the optimal play for a game with only options to shove or fold. And the optimal play would be for Jack 8 suited to shove if all the opponents are playing as they should. And then we are thinking about are they? Even though Meiryu is... I think he's probably a bit wider than that. Because he did do some pretty weird calls, and the Luda Babe is a wild card. He liked to see a lot of flops, so. But I'm adding here some variety to his ranges. Because we are getting called. We might get called pretty wildly, but with pretty interesting hands. And then if we are looking at our ranges, actually Jack 8 suited, if there is one wild card, it pretty quickly gets to be a unprofitable shove, and it doesn't take even a lot in here. And Neo said that min-raise would be safer. And the problem would be that you have to call anyway because of bot odds, right? If we are min-raising here to 800 chips, the Meiryu's and Ruthenia's shoves would be so small compared to our stack size that we would need to call at least Meiryu and Ruthenia, and against Ludababe we can even fold. It adds only 50% of the hand, so then I can make the opponent's range wider but weaker. So it's like an 8% hand, 8% range. That's also going to be slightly weaker than a normal 8% range. So I can select here with the edit range, I can add some hand weights that the opponent will do 50% with this hand he will call and 50% he will fold. So that's just a trick, because in this situation I think the Ludababe can be likely to call less and call more, but I think that if he calls more, his range is going to be weaker than the percentage points would indicate, if it makes any sense. So let's go to the next hand, and this is an interesting hand as well. We need to wait for the stack sizes. So in this situation, there's Luda Babe with 2.5 big blinds, Meiryu with over 4 big blinds, like 4.5 big blinds, and then there is the insane Finn that has been shoving pretty much every hand. And what's the optimal play for Meiryu? Or let's say that Meiryu is now holding King 3 suited, and he's facing an opponent that has been raising really widely. Is it profitable for Meiryu to be calling with King 3 suited? And actually then there would be the next question. If Aarnimetsa would know that Meiryu is calling with King 3 suited, is it still profitable to shove 3-5 off? Nice, there are more questions for you to think about. So, for Meiryu, is it profitable to call with King 3 suited? For Aarnimetsa, is it profitable to shove 5-3 off if you know that Meiryu is calling 3-5 suited? I want your opinions. And Marcus Y is the first one to say the fold with King 3 suited. Are there any other opinions for this situation? I don't know that are people now at home frantically trying to run Hold'em Resources calculator to see that what's going to be the most profitable in this situation. And Neo1186 said that King 3 suited has 54% versus any 2 range. So Neo, then it's going to be the question. If you are getting 54% in this situation, is it going to be profitable for you to call with the 54% equity? And now we are getting some answers. So in this situation, if Meiryu knows that Aarnimetsa is shoving any 2, then King 3 suited is still a bad call, even against any 2 hands, and that's even though he's having great pot odds. Like he needs to have only 38% pot odds here, and he's getting 54%, so it's going to be a really interesting situation. I actually think that this would be an interesting opportunity to look at a different tool, to look at the ICM situation in this situation. So we can look at ICM Explorer in this situation. If you are having the free version, you can do the 50, 30, 20 analysis easily, and let's clear the air. So we are having 3 stacks here. We are having one stack with 1, 5, 3, 2, and his bet is 50, so there is going to be 50 chips in the middle for him. And then there is the better, that's Aarnimetsa. And I'm having here 9.3k chips because there is also the point of the 50 chips in the middle, so 9, 2, 3, 4. And then there is the caller that's having 650 chips in the middle. I'm having 350 in the middle. So then there's a Meiryu that's having 2, 6, 8, 4 chips. And then we are asking for call push. And this is actually pretty interesting in here. Because with ICM Explorer, we can look that just the ICM equity needed in this situation would be exactly 54.83. So the risk premium for this guy with the second stack, when he's having about twice the stack of Ludababe, the risk premium is 17% in this situation. And that's something that is really useful for even the MTT players among you, because practically every MTT, every sit and go tournament, the three-handed mathematics is almost the same. And this is something that's pretty insane to understand, that if you are playing with a middle stack against the largest stack, you need to be really tight. And it wouldn't be the same if when him and the other guy would have the same stack, or we can actually look at this. So let's see 2684 and do the call push again. Then he would need only 49.78%. And this is because his stack is now worth a lot more. Like, if we can look at the previous, like this is the previous calculation. If Meiryu folds here, his equity will be 29% of the prize pool, so $8.99. If he wins, his equity will increase only by 7.4%. And if he loses, his equity will drop by 9%. So that's, and if he ties, it's going to be, his equity is going to increase by 1.7%, so. But in the other situation, even though the chip size would be exactly the same, the equity of a fold is a lot smaller, like 1.5% smaller, because he's less likely to get the second place money. The 30% for the second place finish would get him against this, because this Ludababe would be less likely to be eliminated during the next hand. So that's something that matters a lot. And that's actually a really good point for Sakal to ask, that it wouldn't be the same when the opponent and the next guy would have the same stack. But these kind of situations will get completely insane if, let's say, this opponent is having a 4000 chip stack and there is only 500 chip stack. Because then practically this caller three-handed requires a pretty good hand to do anything against the largest stack. So it's going to be quite interesting, and I think this ICM Explorer will, it's not as good as a calculator as a Hold'em resources. Like, it's meant for engineers, but it will, like Hold'em resources, it calculates what the different hands will do. But the ICM Explorer, you can have better visibility in a situation and see how the situation ICM wise changes in different situations, and it will help you understand the situations better. And then the other question, if we know that opponent is calling king 3, would we still be shoving king 3-5 off? And then we can do a trick that we can go this way and plot range versus hand equities. How much would Meiryu need to be calling, for us not to be shoving 5-3 off. And for us not to be shoving 5-3 off, he would need to be calling 60% of his hands. Let's look at what that looks like. And now our best response is not shoving any 2 anymore. Actually, it was only 60%. And 5-3 off is still a push if he calls 59% of hands. That means he calls with every pocket pair, every suited jack, every unsuited queen, and plenty of pretty crappy looking hands. So we are not going to adjust by any means, even when we know that our opponent calls us king 3 suited. We wouldn't be folding 5-3 off even if our opponent shows jack 3 suited. So I think that's kind of interesting for you to think. And let's go for the final hand. And of course, when you are against the luck box, you should fold these king 3 suiteds. You should fold them anyway, but if you are against the luck box that will, even when dominated, will get the 3-outer, then fold even more. And then there is a hand that, should I shove ace-5 off? And I think that probably guys that asked me this during the session, I think now that this ace-5 off is a losing shove. Especially as there's 2 players with bigger stacks. But let's still go through it. And Neo, for the side question, this is the best response button, the Alt plus B. So if we have something like we are having a really large hand, so for example this hand, it doesn't matter, we can play this run Nash calculation, but this best response, it only looks at the ranges that we have changed, or the ranges that are important for that equity spot. So if we are having a 9-handed spot with a large ICM calculation, it might take a long time to run the calculation, but the best response is pretty much instantaneous. So that's the way that why I was referring to the best response button. And you should ask on our forums on how to get the beta version of the Hold'em Resources calculator. I can then paste the link for where to get the ideas, because the beta version is having some nice spots like what is the maximum exploit that is utilized right now. And Shackle, I think that any suited ace should be a shove there, but I'm a bit unsure. That's why we are looking at these hands. We are looking at these hands to improve our actions for the next time. Neo, post a thread to our forums on that, and I'll come back at you after this coaching is over. It's then easier for me to search for the link and just paste it to you than use the coaching time for that. But so in here, it's also a pretty nice idea on this that if we are looking at Nash ranges, any suited ace will be a shove, and ace-5 off it's minimally a losing shove in here. I think these guys are probably too wide. And this is also something that's pretty interesting, because I'm using my supernova stars in the table because I think that at least the recreational players are folding more against the Supernova. So I played 100,000 hands with about the same strategy in games that in the same games with the Supernova stars on and Supernova stars off. And it was like 5% more that my steal success grew something like 5% from button and small blinds. So at least the recreational players I think they are giving value to the Supernova stars, and that's something that might be interesting, that some of the players are calling against the Supernova because they want to say that, hey, now I outplayed the Supernova in the games. And then there are some players that are folding more because the Supernova guy probably exploits me so much post flop if I call here, so can't call that wide against him. But if we are looking at a bit wider ranges in here, then we're looking at our own best response. Then ace-5 suited is just a shove. And ace-5 off is going to be quite a horrible shove, so that's something to take into account. And it's also, when I said that I'm used to playing with antes, so if we would have a hyper-sized ante in here, actually let's say that if we would have a normal turbo game-sized ante here, then the situation would be different, because then from cutoff we could shove ace-5 off with the Nash ranges, even when opponents are calling more. So that's something that your ranges need to change a lot with antes and without antes, especially in a game that there are 6 players paying the antes. And I'm trying to mentally adjust my ranges. Like, I'm playing a bit tighter than I usually would in a certain situation, because I know that my ranges are mainly adjusted on the games with antes. So then when there are no antes, I'm trying to ratchet a few spots. But as you can see, like the most we will fold compared to, let's have a new one without the antes. We adjust the rates a bit. So in here we'll see that there are hands that are not at least huge losers there. Jack 10 off, King 10 off, King 8 suited. The solid hands are not going to be strong losers, and there's not going to be a lot of movement in those. But from aces, we know that in here with Nash ranges, ace-9 deuce, ace-9 off is just a profitable shove. And if there are antes, the ace-9 off is something that you just can't fold. And ace-4 off would be break-even, so that's something that's probably the hardest to adjust, because you'll need to move so much in these offsuit hands with a high card and a low card. But I hope that there were some really good spots, and I hope that there are some interesting and useful adjustments for the low stakes games as well. And if you are playing 9 max turbos, I recommend trying the knockouts as well. I think the knockout structure is fun, and usually it makes players play even worse than... And it's even more pronounced in a sit and go structure. When players are playing worse in those games, it means that players are calling more. So then they are colliding more, and then the optimal strategy is it's going to be slightly tighter. But if you are playing the knockouts pretty much the same way you would play normal tournaments, I'm thinking it will be profitable for sure. And that's a bit of a shame that perhaps we need to do another knockout session, because there were like no interesting knockout mathematics during this session. It's pretty much we gone through like just playing the normal games, because there were no interesting knockout situations. So. But I think now it's time to end. and thanks for everybody taking part of the chat. And thanks for everybody watching. If you are going to sleep, have a good night. And if you are still playing poker, may this be the winningest night of them all. Bye bye!